this session, we understood about provider component using which we can update the context value. We also understood about the context flow. In today's session, we are going to continue about context. Firstly, we'll understand about using context when some data has to be available between different routes. And also, we are going to use context in e-commerce application and build the add to cart feature. So let's get started. So to set the code breakdown for today's session, you need to run this, then run npm install. With this, all the dependencies will get installed. So previously, we understood that context is a mechanism which is mainly used to avoid the prop drilling problem, right? Apart from this, we can also use context when some data has to be available between different routes, or when the data has to be available for more number of components. In such cases also, we make use of context when the data has to be available between different routes, or when the data has to be available for more number of components. In such scenarios, we make use of context. Let's understand this with the help of an example. So we'll take the e-commerce application and build the add to cart feature. So what is this add to cart feature? When we go specific to a particular product, there's an add to cart button. And if we click on it, the corresponding product has to be added to the cart and has to be displayed in the cart route. This is the add to cart feature. So here you can see we have the product item details route. So there we have the add to cart button at the bottom. So if the user clicks on the add to cart button, the corresponding product has to be added to the cart. And when the user goes to the cart route, he should be able to see that product, right? So this is what we want to build. Okay, this is the add to cart feature that we want to build. So now let's understand the different routes that are present in the e-commerce application. So we are already familiar with login, home, products, right? Apart from this, the product item details, cart route have also been added in the initial code. Okay, we can have a look at the initial code briefly. So this is the app component where we have the different routes. There you can see we have the product item details route, we have the cart route, login form, and so on. Let's have a look at the initial code that is provided to you. So this is the initial code that is provided to you. So firstly, let's go to the app component. So app.js. So here you can see the initial code available to you. These are the different routes. So we have the login, home, products. Apart from this, we have the product item details route and the cart route also. Okay. So this is the app component that is provided to you. Okay. So now we can see the output here, right? This is the home route. We can go to the products route. And when we click on a particular product, we get navigated to the product item details route. So this is the product item details route where we have the add to cart button. So if we click on this button, so the corresponding product has to be added to the cart. And when we navigate to the cart route, so then it should be displayed here. Okay, this is the feature that we want to build. So we have seen the app component. Let's have a look at the product item details component also. So in the components, you can see there are various components here. Let's look at the product item details. Here you can see we have the product item details component. So this is the initial code that is available to you. You need not go through all of this. You might have already done this in the coding practices, right? So there's the initial code that is available to you. Okay, so which will give us this when you navigate to a particular product. So we have this particular output, right? So this product item details route will give us a product of this kind. Okay, clear? Now, coming to the cart route, let's also look at the cart route, right? So in the add to cart feature, we also need the cart route, right? So this is the cart component. So in this particular component, you can see we have the my cart heading. Apart from this, we are displaying the cart items using this cart list view component. So let's go to that. So this is the cart list view component. So here you can see that we have some sample data that is provided initially, and based on the sample data, we are displaying the cart items. You can see here, right? We are iterating over the cart list and we are displaying the cart items based on the sample data that is present here, right? So that's the reason. Here when we navigate to the cart route, so we have this sample cart items being displayed. Okay, so this is the brief about the initial code, right? I've just roughly gone through it. So once pause the video, you can go through the initial code. You'll get an understanding about what are the different components in what is the initial code available to you. Okay, so we have looked at the initial code, right? So we have seen the product item details component, then we have seen the cart component. We understood that the cart items are being displayed in the cart list view where there's some sample data and we are iterating over that sample data list and we are displaying the cart items. So with that, we have seen this output. If you run npm start, we were able to see this output. This is the product item details route and this is the cart route. Okay, so as I mentioned, once go through the provided initial code and observe the component structure, get a brief understanding about the initial code provided to you regarding the various components that are involved. Okay, clear? So I hope you have gone through the initial code. Now let's proceed further and start building the add to cart feature, right? So we got an understanding about this add to cart feature, right? So let's start building this add to cart feature. So in the product item details route, we have the add to cart button, and when the user clicks on this button, the corresponding product has to be added to a cart list. And then in the cart route, we have to display the cart items based on the cart list, right? So this is what we have to do, okay? So at the product item details route, if the user clicks on add to cart, so the product has to be added to the cart list. Okay, we have to update the cart list if the user clicks on add to cart. Now, coming to the cart route, we have to access the cart list, and based on the cart list, we have to display the cart items, right? This step is clear, right? So, for both the product item details route and the cart route, the cart list should be available, right? Cart list, this is the data that should be available for both the routes, right? So that we understood, because at the product item details route, we have to update the cart list. So to update it, that data has to be available. And at the cart route, we have to display the cart items based on the cart list. So again, there also we need the cart list. So the cart list should be available for both the routes, right? So we understood that we can make use of the context when some data has to be available for different routes, right? So here you can see that for product item details route and the cart route, so the cart list data should be available. So in such scenarios, we can maintain this data in the context. So there you can see we have the cart context in which we are maintaining the cart list. We are initializing it with an empty list. Okay, clear? So since this cart list should be available for both the routes, we are maintaining that in a context. We also understood that in the context, we have to maintain the required functions to update the data. So here we have the cart list, right? To update the cart list, there are some required functions. So we have to maintain these required functions in the context. Okay, we previously understood this, right? So to update the cart list, we have add cart item and delete cart item functions. So we are going to maintain these functions in the context because these are the required functions to update the data. So we are going to maintain them in the context. So finally, in our context, we have the cart list. This is the data that should be available for different routes. And we have the methods that are required to update the cart list. That is the add cart item and delete cart item. Okay, so this is the context that we have to create. Okay, so let's create the cart context. So here you can see the code related to that. So react.createContextOf, to which we are providing the cart list, initializing it with an empty list, then the add cart item and delete cart item, and finally we are exporting it. Okay, so in this way we are creating the cart context. Okay, so let's create the cart context. So firstly, I'm going to close all of these. So now coming to creating the cart context, where do we have to create this context? As we previously understood, we maintain the context in a context folder parallel to the components. So let's create that folder. So I'm going to create a new folder, context. In this, we are going to maintain the context files. Okay, so right now we want to create the cart context. So let's create a file for it, cart context.js. So in this, we are going to create the cart context. So firstly, to create the cart context, we have to import React. Okay, React from React. Okay, next. So we are going to create the cart context equal to react.createContextOf, and we have to provide the initial context. So what is the information that we have to place it in the context? Firstly, cart list, right? We are going to initialize it with an empty list. And then the methods that are necessary to update this cart list, that is add cart item. Okay, so that would be an empty method for now. Okay, and then delete cart item. Okay, that would again be an empty method. Okay, so we are done adding this. Finally, we'll export this so that we can use it wherever necessary. So export default cart context. Okay, done. That's it. So we are done creating the cart context. Okay, clear? And we have exported it, so it is available for the different routes. Okay, so we are done with this step. And now the cart context is available for the product item details route and the cart route. Now we can build the add to cart feature. So what do we have to do? When the user clicks on add to cart, so we have to update the cart list present in the cart context, right? And then when the user navigates to the cart route, we have to access the cart list in the context and we have to display the cart items. So now let's start building the add to cart feature. Okay, so for this, let's understand the different steps involved. So the first step is, based on the cart list in the context, we have to display the cart items in the cart component. Okay, that's the first step. Okay, next, we have to update the context, right? When the user clicks on add to cart button, we have to add that product into the cart list present in the context. So for that, we need the provider component because we are trying to update the context, right? So the step 2 is adding the provider component to update the context. And finally, we are going to add the event listener for the add to cart button and we'll update the cart list. That is the final step. So these are the 3 steps that we have to do so that we can build our add to cart feature. Okay, the first thing is based on the cart list in the context, we'll display the cart items. Second step is to update the cart list in the context, we need a provider component. We are going to add that provider component. And finally, we are going to add this on-click functionality to the add to cart button so that we can update the cart list. Okay, these are the 3 steps. Okay, clear? Even if you don't understand these steps initially, it's completely fine. As we grow further, you'll be able to easily understand each and every step. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start with the first step, that is displaying the cart items using the context. So in the cart context, we have the cart list. And now in the cart route, we have to display the cart items based on this cart list in the context. Okay, clear? So where are we displaying the cart items? In the cart list view component, right? We understood it while we were going through the initial code. So in the cart list view component, we are iterating over the cart list and we are displaying the cart items. Now, the cart list should be from the context. Okay, so let's do that. So firstly, we want to access the cart context. So we are importing that and we want to access the cart list from the cart context, right? So that for that, we have to use the consumer component. So you can see we have added the consumer component. So to which we have the callback function. From there, we are accessing the cart list. And finally, based on the cart list, we are displaying the cart items. Okay, we have moved that code inside the callback function. Now, we no longer need the sample data. So we are getting rid of the sample data. Okay. And now in the cart context, we are adding some sample data so that we can see the output. Okay, clear? So with this, we will be able to see an output in this manner. When you go to the cart component, the cart route, you'll be able to see an output of this kind. Okay, so let's do these steps. So we are doing the first step, that is displaying the cart items based on the cart context. So we have the cart context here, we have the cart list. So based on this cart list, we want to display the cart items. So firstly, we'll go to the cart. Okay, so here we have the cart list view, right? So in the cart list view, we are displaying the cart items. So let's go to the cart list view. So there's the cart list view. So here there's some sample data and based on this sample data, we are displaying the cart items. Okay, till here it's clear, right? So now instead of this sample data that is present here, we want to access the cart list present in the context and based on this, we want to display the cart items. Okay, so for this, firstly, we want to access the context, right? We will import that. So let me import the context here. So import cart context from // context from context. There we have the cart context. From there we are importing this. Now to access a particular value in the context, so we are going to use the consumer component, right? Dot consumer. So within this, we will have a callback function to which the context value will be passed as an argument. So from that context value, we can access whatever we want. Like here, I want the cart list. So I'm accessing that. So now you can see the code where we are displaying the cart items. So let's directly move that inside the callback function. Okay. And we have to return this JSX. So I'm going to write a return here. Okay. Clear? So now you can see this. So based on the cart list, we are displaying it here. Now we no longer need this, right? So I'm going to just get rid of this. Okay, clear? So now what we are doing? Okay, so we are accessing the cart context, right? So from this, we got the cart list and based on that cart list, we are displaying the cart items. That's it. We are done with it. Okay, so based on the cart list present in the context, we are displaying the cart items. So now let's have a look at the output. So currently it's empty because in the context, it's an empty list. We can give some sample data to it to have a look at the sample output. So for this, what we could do is we can just copy the sample data. So we have the sample data, right? So let me just remove this. I'm just copying the sample data that we have used previously, and I'm going to provide that here. Okay. So now previously it was empty because we have provided empty list. Now I have given some sample data. So that's the reason we got these products. So we understood that based on the cart list present in the context, we are displaying the cart items in this cart component, right? So that step is clear for us. Okay. So we are done with this, right? So we are done with the step 1. That's it, right? We have to display the cart items based on the context, and we have done that, right? And we have seen this output. Okay. So based on the context, we are displaying the cart items. Okay. So currently we have some sample data, and based on that we are getting the cart items in the cart route. But whereas, what do we have to do? Okay, we have to update this cart list based on the user actions, right? So when the user clicks on add to cart button, the cart list has to be updated, right? So let's do the steps related to this. Okay, so first, to update the context, we need a provider component, right? So we have to do that. So we are done displaying the cart items based on the context. The next thing is updating the context, right? So to update the context, we previously understood that we make use of the provider component. So let's add the provider component so that we can update the context. Okay, that is the step 2. So let's add the provider component to update the context. So here we have two routes, right? Product item details route and cart route. So coming to the product item details route, that's where we have the add to cart button, and when we click on this, then the cart list in the context has to be updated, right? So now to update, what do? We make use of the provider component to update the context value. So the question here is, where do we have to write the provider? Okay, we understood that we want to update the context value. For this, we have to write a provider component. Now, where do we have to write the provider component? Previously, we understood that we write the provider component so that it encloses all the components which make use of this context value, right? So wherever this context value is being used, so we have to write in a provider at a component where it will enclose all of these components, all the routes which makes use of this context value, okay? So here, in our case, we have the cart list where we are making use of the cart context, right? So similarly, later on in the product item details component also, we will be making use of the cart context, right? So now the provider component that we write, so it should be placed in such a way that it encloses product item details and also the cart list view. It has to enclose both of them, okay? So now, where do we have to write? It has to enclose both product item details and the cart list view. So where do we have to write? Simple, right? Obviously, the app component, you can see that. So app component is the only component that encloses both product item details and the cart list view. So that's the reason we are going to write the provider component at the app component. Okay, clear? So let's do that. So you can see here at the app component, we are importing the cart context and we are writing the provider component. You can also observe that the provider component is enclosing all the routes. The reason for that is, so later on, we might need this cart list in other routes also. We need this cart context in other routes also. So that's the reason we have enclosed all the routes within the provider component. Okay, clear? So let's do this step. So we want to write the provider component, and we understood that, so the best place to write this provider component would be the app component. Okay, so I'm going to the app component. So this is the app component that we have. So I want to write the provider component within the app component. Okay, so let me do that. So basically it has to enclose the product item details route and the cart route. So for better usage, we are going to enclose all the routes. Okay, we are going to have the cart context enclosing all the routes. Okay, so firstly, let me import the cart context from context/cart context. So I'm importing this cart context. Now, as we understood, we are going to enclose all the routes. So I'm going to write the provider component here. So within the provider, we are enclosing all the routes. So here you can see. I'm done specifying this. So here we have enclosed all the routes within the provider. Okay, clear? So that's it. So here we understood about where to write the provider component, and we are done writing the provider component. The next thing is we have to provide the value to the provider component, right? So let's see about that. What do we have to provide and how do we have to provide? So let's see about that. Okay. So now, previously we understood that. So when it comes to providing value to the provider component, we have to provide all the keys and the corresponding values, because the entire object will be replaced by the provider component. So in our cart context, we have cart list, we have add cart item, delete cart item. So we have to provide all these three to the provider component. That is necessary. Okay. So that's the reason we need the cart list, add cart item and delete cart item at the app component. So the app component should contain all these three. Okay, the cart list, add cart item and delete cart item. Currently, the app component does not have these. So we have to add these. Okay, so let's do that. So firstly, let's start with the cart list. So we have to add the cart list to the app component. So where do we want to maintain this cart list? So the best place to maintain this cart list is in the state. The reason here is, whenever the cart list will be updated, okay, so if it is in the state, so the state will be updated, right? So when the state gets updated, then what will happen? You know it. What will happen? the render method will be called, right? So when the render method gets called, the provider component is present inside the render method, right? So the provider component will be called, so with a new value, and then the context will be updated, right? So whenever there's change in the cart list, the context will be updated. The provider will be called and the context will be updated. That's the advantage of maintaining the cart list in the state. So if there's any change in the cart list, if we update the cart list, automatically the context will be updated. The cart list in the context will be updated. So that's the reason we have to maintain the cart list in the state. This might seem a little bit complex. Just go through it again. What I'm saying is, if we maintain the cart list in the state, and if there's any change in the cart list, the state will be updated. Because the state will be updated, the render method will be called, and in turn the provider, and finally the context will be updated. That is the advantage of maintaining the cart list in the state. So in the app component, we are going to maintain the cart list in the state. Okay, clear? So you can see here, currently the app component is a functional component, whereas now we want a state in the app component. So we have to convert that into a class component. So we have to convert the app, which is a functional component, into a class component. So we are doing that here. Okay, firstly, we are converting that into a class component. So next is, we have to maintain this cart list in the state. So you can see that we are maintaining the cart list in the state. Currently it is empty. And then we are accessing this cart list in the render method, and we are providing that as a value to the provider. Clear? Okay, so let's do these steps now. So we understood that we have to maintain the cart list in the state, right? So we understood the flow there. So currently the app component is actually a functional component, and to maintain state, we have to have the app component as a class component. So let's do that. So for that, firstly, I have to import component from React. Okay, so now when it comes to class component, how do we write? Class, the component name, which is app, extends the component, right? So this is how we write the class component, right? So I'm just removing this here. Okay, now, so the next thing is, the render method should return this JSX, right? So let me write the render method. So the render method will enclose all of this. Okay, and finally we have to return this from the render method. So I'm writing the return. So now this app is converted into a class component, right? Now we can have the state. So let's write the state. So state equal to, and in the state we want to maintain the cart list, right? So cart list, and we are going to initialize it with an empty list. Okay, so this is done. Now we have to provide this cart list as a value to the provider, right? So let me access the cart list equal to this dot state, and we'll provide this as a value. This is one of the keys in the entire object, so I'm providing that here. Okay, clear? That's it. So we are done providing the cart list to the provider component, right? Okay. So what else do we have in the context? Cart list done. Apart from this, we have the add cart item and delete cart item methods also that we have to provide, right? So currently these methods are not present in the app component. So let's add these updation methods to the app component. Okay. So you can see here, we have added these methods, add cart item and delete cart item, and we are providing them to the provider component. There you can see, right? Clear? So that's it. So we have to provide the cart list, add cart item and delete cart item, and we are providing all of them there as value to the provider component, and that's it. Okay, it's done, right? So let's do these steps. So now to the provider component, we also have to provide the add cart item and delete cart item updation methods. So currently they are not present in the app component. So let's start writing them. Add cart item equal to, currently I'm going to have empty methods. Later on, I'll add the functionality based on the requirement. So here I have the delete cart item. So now let's provide them here. Okay. So apart from cart list, we also have to provide add cart item. So this dot add cart item, and similarly delete cart item, this dot delete cart item. Okay. That's it. We are done providing them. Okay. These are the two methods, and we are done providing them here. And finally, we have to provide the cart list, add cart item and delete cart item, and we are providing them. Okay. Clear? So done. We are done adding the provider component and giving the values to it. Okay. So that's it. Okay. So this step is done. And finally, we have added the provider component at the app component, which is enclosing the product item details and also the cart list view, where we are going to have our consumer components. Okay, clear? So this is the step 2. And with the step 2, we are done with adding the provider component. So now let's have a look at the output. So since the cart list is empty in the state, so that's the reason in the output here, there are no cart items being displayed. Okay, because we have updated the cart list in the context as empty. Again, if you provide some sample data here, okay, let me provide some sample data that we already have. Okay, so if I provide some sample data here, so then you can have a look at the output where we have this sample cart items. So with this, what did we understand? So if the state is being updated, okay, so then the render method is being called. Since the render method is being called, so the provider component will be called with the new value, that is the sample data that we are providing. And because of that, okay, so the context is being updated and all the consumer components wherever we are using this context are being re-rendered, and that's the reason we were able to see this cart items. So understand the flow here. This seems a little bit complex because a lot of things are involved. I'll repeat it again. So firstly, if the state is being updated, so then the render method will be called. In the render method, we have the provider component and we are providing the new value here, right? So then what will happen? What will provider component do? We'll update the context with the new value. So once the context has been updated, all the consumer components where we are using this context will get updated. So where are we using this context? In the cart list view where we are displaying the cart items, right? So that's the reason we have the updated output. Okay, clear? Similarly, now if we make it as an empty list, right now it has some sample data. I'll update it with an empty list. Okay, so then you can see that it is empty. The reason here is because we have updated the state. The render method has been called with an empty list, right? So it has been the context has been updated and all the consumer components have been re-rendered. So in the cart list view, we are making use of this consumer component, right? So this has been re-rendered and that's the reason we have empty here. There are no cart items because the cart list is empty. So here it's all empty. Okay, clear? So we are done with this step 2, right? So where based on the state, we are appropriately displaying the cart items, right? We have the provider component and based on that, the context value is being updated. And once the context values are updated, all the consumer components are re-rendered, right? This is what we have understood, okay? So the flow here is, so if the state is updated, the render method will be called. Within the render method, we have the provider component to which we are providing the new value. So because the provider is being called, the context will be updated. And once the context is being updated, all the consumer components will be updated. So here we are using the consumer component at the cart list view. So it got updated and we were able to see the updated view. What are we left with in our add to cart feature? The final step. That is, when the user clicks on add to cart button, we have to update the cart list. Right now, we have the cart list in the state. But when the user clicks on the button, we have to update the cart list, right? We are still left with that step, okay? We have the provider component. We are displaying the cart items using the context. These things are done, okay? When the user clicks on the button, we have to have the event listener based on which the cart list in the state has to be updated. Then obviously, the entire flow will be completed, right? So let's do that. That is updating the cart list on add to cart button click. Firstly, we have the add to cart button, right? When the user clicks on it, we want to call the add cart item method present in the cart context, okay? That's the first thing that we have to do, okay? So in the product item details component, we want to access the cart context and the add cart item method of cart context and call that method on button click. So this is the initial code of product item details. So firstly, in the render product details view, we have the add to cart button. So there we are going to add the consumer component, access the add cart item method and move all the code related to that method inside it. There you can see, right? So we are updating the function also appropriately. And finally, we have this consumer component. Within this, we are accessing the add cart item method. Now we have to call this when the user clicks on the add to cart button, right? So you can see that. So we are adding this on click event listener. So the on click add to cart method will be called, in which we are going to call the add cart item method from the context. Okay, clear? So in this add cart item method, for this, we are passing the product that has to be added. So what we want to do, we want to add this product to the cart list, right? So what is a product that has to be added? That information is passed as an argument to the add cart item method. Okay, clear? So let's do these steps now. So firstly, we want to add this on click listener and call the add cart item method of the cart context, right? So let's focus on that. Okay, so in the cart context, we have this add cart item method and we want to call this method. We want to add a cart item. We want to update the cart list. So we have to call the updation method, right? So firstly, we'll go into the product item details. Okay, so in this, there's a lot of code. You need not worry about it. Okay, so you might have already done this in the coding practices. Okay, so I'm just collapsing all the various things that are present here. So currently we are focused on rendering the product details view. Okay. So in this, at the bottom, you can see there is an add to cart button. So for this, we want to add the on-click functionality and call the add cart item method. Okay. So for that, firstly, we have to access the context. So I have to import the context here. Okay. Import cart context from /context/cart context. I have imported it. Now I want to make use of it in the render product details view. Okay. So cart context dot consumer. So for this, value will be passed as an argument. So from there we can access the add cart item from the context value. Now we have the method that has to be called, right? Now we have to call this method when it has to be called. Okay, so firstly, let's move all of this code into the callback function that we already have to do. So we are doing that, right? So we are done moving it. Okay, so into the consumer component. Okay, so there's a little bit alignment issues. I'm just setting that. Okay, so this need not be in this manner because we have to just return this single consumer component. So I'm going to just convert this in this manner. Okay. So now coming to this, so we have this add to cart button, right? So let's just expand it. Okay, here. So for this, we want to add the on click functionality. Okay, let's do that. On click equal to, so on click add to cart. Okay, I'm adding this method here. So let me define this method on the top. So constant on click add to cart equal to, it's a method where we are going to call the add cart item. And to this add cart item, we want to pass the product information, the corresponding product information. So we have the product data here, so we can directly pass that. Okay. So I'm going to pass the product data. And here, we also want to pass the updated quantity, right, which is maintained in the state. So that's the reason I'm going to expand the product data using the spread operator. I'm spreading it and I'm passing the updated quantity here. So with this, I'm going to pass the updated information. Okay, this is what I'm going to do, right? So I want the product information to be passed to the add cart item so that we can update the cart list. So I'm passing that here. I'm expanding the product data and the updated quantity, and I'm passing this entire object to the add cart item method. Okay, clear? So now to this updation method, we are passing the product information, the product that has to be added into the cart list. Okay, clear? So we are done with these steps, right? So finally, what we have to do, so with that product information that has been passed to the add cart item, we have to update the cart list. We have to do that, right? So now this add cart item that is present in the context is nothing but the method that we have written in app component, right? So in that app component, the product is passed as an argument and we are updating the state with the product that has been passed. We are updating the cart list, you can see in the state, with the product that is being passed, right? So let's do this. So I'll explain it clearly. So right now we are calling this add cart item method present in the context, right? So if you go to the app component, so in the app component, so you can see to the provider, we have passed this add cart item method, right? So now when we call this add cart item from this product item details component, so what is the method that is being called, right? So this dot add cart item, that is this method will be called. Okay, clear? So this is the method that gets called when the add to cart button gets clicked. Okay, so when you click that button, so this is the method that gets called in the app component. So to this, the product is passed as an argument. Okay. So now what we have to do, we have the product that has to be added to the cart list. So we have to update the cart list, right? So I'm going to do this dot set state of. So since we want the previous cart list, so I'm going to use the callback syntax. So here to this, we are going to have the object. Okay. So now cart list has to be updated. So based on the previous state of cart list, and we have to add the new product that has been passed as an argument. So I'm doing that. So using the spread operator, I'm accessing the previous cart list, adding the new product, and finally I'm updating the cart list here. Okay. So now what we are doing. So when the user clicks on add to cart button, so this method is being called to which product has been passed an argument. So now the state is being updated. So this cart list will be updated, right? We have the new cart list in the state. Since the state has been updated, the render method will be called. And in the render method, we have the provider, right? So now since we have the provider in the render method, so the new cart list is being passed here from the state. So the context will be updated, and since the context has been updated, all the consumers will be re-rendered. So as we are updating the state, so the context is being updated, the consumer components are re-rendered, and we'll be able to see the updated output. Okay, this is what we are doing now. Okay, I know that it looks a bit complex because there are a lot of components that are involved. So in case you're confused at any point, it's okay, it's completely fine. It's obvious. So initially you're learning these things. So you can go through the video again. You can pause it in between and understand what exactly is happening. Okay. So what's happening here? When the user clicks on add to cart button, right? So this will be called, right? So add cart item method will be called from the context, right? So in the context, we have assigned this method, this add to cart method as value. So this method will be called where we are updating the state. And previously we understood about once we update the state, how the entire output will be reflected, right? We already have seen that. So the same flow will continue. The additional thing that we have done in this step is calling this method on click of add to cart button. Okay, simple. Okay, so the product is being passed as an argument, the cart list is being updated, so the render method will be called and so on, the context will be updated, and we'll be able to see the updated output. So shall we see the final add to cart feature? Let's do that. Okay, currently you can see that the cart is empty. The reason is initially in the state, the cart list is an empty list. Okay, so it's empty. Now let's go to a particular product. Okay, we have a lot of products here. So let's go to a particular product. There's an add to cart button. Let's click on this. So when you click on this add to cart button, so this method will be called. Okay, so once this method has been called, the state has been updated. So the provider will be called with the new cart list. So the context will be updated, and wherever we are using the consumer components, there we'll get the updated cart list. As you can see here, we are able to see the output, right? Similarly, let's see another product. Let's click on add to cart. Let's go to the cart, and you can see we have the new item here, right? So in this way, we have achieved the add to cart feature. Okay. So we have updated the cart list and we were able to see this output. So when we have navigated to a particular product and clicked on add to cart button, in the cart route, we were able to see the corresponding product, right? So it's very simple, right? You understood this, everything? Okay. So in case at any point, if you are confused, it's completely fine. Just go through the video again, pause the video, try to understand on your own. You will be able to easily understand. Just give it some time and just go through the video again. You will be able to understand. Okay, clear? So here, what we have done. We have made use of this cart context, right? So cart list view and product item details. This is where we have used the consumer components, and the provider component is present at the app component. Okay, clear? Now, let's understand the data flow. I've been talking about this data flow, right? So let's visually understand what's exactly happening. So when the user clicks on add to cart button in the product item details component, so then the add cart item method is being called. Okay, that is present in the app component, right? So when the add cart item method is being called, so then we are updating the state with the new cart list. Okay, so since we are updating the state, the render method will be called. Within the render method, we have the provider to which we have the new cart list. We are passing the new cart list. Okay, so then the context value will be updated, and since the context value has been updated, wherever we have the consumer components, they will get updated, they'll get re-rendered. So the cart list view has been re-rendered, and we were able to see the items. Each and every step, what we have achieved, you will be able to easily get through it. Okay, so these are the 3 steps that we have done. Firstly, we displayed the cart items based on the context. Next, to update the context, we have added a provider component. And finally, based on the button click, we have updated the cart list in the context. Okay, clear? So we are done with these 3 steps. Okay, do try these things on your own. That's when you will be able to easily understand. In today's session, we understood that we can make use of context when some data has to be available between different routes or when it has to be available for more number of components. And we have made use of this context in the e-commerce application to build the add to cart feature. In the next session, we are going to